From Quito, Ecuador, I'm Soini Gray, and this is From the South, the midday news brief from Tell Us Your English. We start this new edition right now. The Catalonian president, Carles Puigdemont, has declared the independence of Catalonia and immediately suspended it in order to start negotiations with Madrid. These are live pictures from outside the parliament in Barcelona. Puigdemont arrived at parliament a few hours ago for an address in which he said he might declare independence. He drew large cheers from the members of the Catalan Assembly when he said he would respect the result of the referendum on October 1st and assume independence. Catalonia has to be independent, he said, but moments later, he requested that Parliament suspend that same declaration of independence to give time to start a dialogue with the Spanish government in Madrid. Our correspondent, Vincent Montagun, is following the dramatic events in Barcelona. He joins us now for a live update. Hello, Vincent. We're going to have that interview with Mr. Montagut in a couple of minutes. So, present organizations in Colombia say the number of campesinos killed by the police in Thursday's Tumaco massacre could rise. The leader of the National Coca Growers Organization say they believe there are still more bodies in the forested area, but the police and military are preventing anyone from getting into that part of the forest to check. The Colombian government has admitted that the police fired on the campesino, and they say that 6 were killed. But the campesinos say that number is actually closer to 8 or 10. Lorena Hoyos is in Tumaco, and she files this report.
Compañeros, buenos días.
Good morning. We are here in the rural part of Tumaco in the Llorente municipality where the concern, sorrow, and fear in the community continues to affect the campesinos. While they continue to bury their comrades who were killed days before, they continue to demand the whereabouts of the rest of their fellow community members who were disappeared as they witness the forced eradication of illicit crops. Yesterday, we were based in 2 municipalities near the site of the massacre, and at one of the municipalities, the Pinal, in the morning, anti-riot police shot tear gas at protesting campesinos who were out demanding to stop the forced eradication of the illicit crops. In the Puerto Rico municipality, we saw how there was a large police presence on the ground and in the air. Helicopters flew over the area, causing fear and tension among residents. The campesinos insist that the government follow the Havana peace accords between the FARC and the government. They want to exchange the coca crops for better life conditions, for food crops, for roads which will allow them to sell their produce, and for guarantees that will enable them to change their lives. But until now, the government remains deaf to the campesinos' demands. Meanwhile, community leaders are waiting to meet with the Vice President, Oscar Naranjo. They expect the government to reply with justice and truth regarding this massacre. Today, there will also be a verification commission of the crime scene, where they will take testimonies and try to find out what is still occurring, because according to communities, there are still bodies of campesinos which have not been buried. We will continue to follow and report from Colombia.
So that's our report from Lorena Hoyos, and we turn now to our correspondent, Vincent Montagood. He's been following the dramatic events in Barcelona. He joins us now for a live update. Hello, Vincent. What's happening in Barcelona?
To our audience and tell us we're English. We're living very important moments. There was a reference to the ex-president Catalan who was killed by the Franco regime. Thousands of Catalan citizens have followed the speech by the Catalan president. It is a very important speech by the Catalan president.
Hello. Hello. Sí, me puede ayudar el audio está terrible.
Okay, so we have to say goodbye to Vincent and on to some other stories. The victims of the Tumaco massacre in the south of Colombia were from neighboring Ecuador. Telesur has been to the Ecuadorian border town of San Lorenzo, and we have this exclusive report.
This is San Lorenzo on Ecuador's northern coast, just across the border from Colombia. It's here that victims of the Tumaco massacre fled, and they are in no doubt about who attacked them.
It's a bad attitude from the Colombian government. How can they massacre Colombian campesinos like that? There was no confrontation at all.
They had to flee across the border to Ecuador, and they're still scared of what the Colombian security forces might do. But they tell their story.
The police shot at all of us, and that was just not right. There should be justice and respect for peasants' rights.
Among the victims was one Ecuadorian who's seeking medical attention. The others say the authorities have ignored their complaints. The same goes for some of the media, who they say are covering up the violence.
There's one Ecuadorian here who is wounded in his ribs. I think he's getting a medical report now.
Human rights advocates who work in these rural areas, as well as others who witnessed the attack on the campesinos, are appealing to the international community.
We need to clarify what happened and make sure that this does not go unpunished. And we ask the countries that guaranteed the peace process in Havana to please help us shed light on the facts about these peasants and the massacre that they suffered.
Both families of the victims and local organizations are doing everything they can to denounce the state and ensure their rights are respected.
Colombia's former FARC rebels have formally registered as a political party with the country's electoral authorities. 6 leaders said they had delivered all of the required documents to the National Electoral Council, including the certificate of the weapons that they handed in to the United Nations, a process that was completed on August 15th. They welcome what they call the beginning of a new era.
A new era for Colombia is beginning. The mobilization of hope, of rebellion, and of the turmoil of dreams of a people who are tired of the abuses of its leaders and does not want to continue being trampled on. We invite everyone to build a country of respect and to establish a government that gives its citizens humane and caring treatment, that gives them access to food, housing, education, and healthcare.
Senate and House committees are moving towards a vote on a fundamental part of the peace process with the former FARC rebels. It's the statutory law on a special jurisdiction for peace. This week, the session is discussing a measure to ban former guerrillas accused of crimes against humanity from being elected to Colombian Congress. Under the peace agreement signed last year, the former guerrilla movement would have 10 seats in Congress reserved for them for 2 electoral terms. More news in a minute. Stay with us. The campaign to elect the governors of Venezuela's 23 states is entering its final stage. In preparation for the regional elections on October 15th, soldiers stood guard over electoral materials in Caracas. At a military ceremony in Caracas, the government said the election shows that the accusations that Venezuela has become a dictatorship are false. Our correspondent in Caracas, Reagan Devines, has been out taking out the pulse of the country as the election campaign nears its end. This is his report.
Hi Sony, yes, we're at Plaza Venezuela in Caracas. Just behind me is one of the offices of the National Electoral Council, the CNE. It's actually one of their offices out of quite a few that were vandalized during the months of April to July, when the actions of violent opposition protesters superseded those of peaceful opposition protesters, that ultimately contributed to the loss of over 100 lives here in Venezuela. It's one of the reasons why Venezuelans are becoming more and more nervous as we draw closer to Sunday's regional elections. Who's more nervous is the government. Just yesterday, they deployed their Plan Republica, or Republic Plan, which places emphasis on the country's Bolivarian National Guards, National Bolivarian Guards, who will be charged with the responsibility of not just ensuring the safety of voters, but the security of voting stations across the country. Just over the last election, voting stations were attacked on July 31st for the National Constituent Assembly elections. It was reported that candidates of those elections on July 31st were also attacked. So there is some cause for some nervousness, and the Bolivarian National Guard is mandated to ensure that all goes well on come Sunday. Now, the CNE is reiterating a call to voters to please ensure that they know exactly where they will be going to vote, as some of those polling stations were vandalized. However, if the message was not received, at the front of those voting stations is a note or a message stating exactly where they must go. Now, Hernan Escara, who is not just a prominent lawyer, but one of the members of the National Constituent Assembly, he sits with that National Constituent Assembly, he says that the upcoming regional elections will be proof that a pluralist democracy exists here in Venezuela. And it's an important point, because Venezuela's opposition has been crying that there is no democracy here in Venezuela, and that the country is run by a dictator, by President Nicolas Maduro. Of course, the government has denied this vehemently and has shown quite a few examples why this claim by the opposition holds no water whatsoever. One of the prominent opposition faces, Juan Requences of the Primera Justicia party, says that he doesn't trust the CNE, the National Electoral Council. However, he has urged that voters go out and express their right to vote. He says that winning all 23 seats for the opposition will maintain the fight in the street. Whether or not this is a precursor of what is to come is yet to be seen. However, President Nicolas Maduro says that he will not tolerate any form of violence whatsoever for these elections or thereafter. He added as well that after the regional elections on October 15th, that the government and the opposition may continue their peace talks as early as next week, Monday, in the Dominican Republic. And he adds that 95% of what has been discussed thus far has been agreed to by both parties. He says that both parties are close to signing an agreement which hopefully will stabilize peace in Venezuela and lead to a progressive, unified movement to healing Venezuela's economy, which is the wish and request of most, if not all, of Venezuelans here. And that's our update for you. Soini, we'll bring you another tomorrow right here from Caracas, Venezuela. Back to you in studio.
Thank you for that, Regan. The former Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff has again rejected any possible U.S. intervention in Latin America as extremely dangerous. She criticized the attempts by the U.S. government to intervene in the political process of some countries, saying that many times the USA has made the mistake of endorsing some opposition parties by saying that they're democratic. In August, U.S. President Donald Trump said he wouldn't rule out a military option in Venezuela.
I don't
have the right to analyze Mr. Trump. If you find somebody who knows what he is capable of, you let me know, because I don't know. What do I think? I could only say that it is serious, and I can tell you another thing. It's extremely irresponsible and criminal to intervene in Venezuela. Why? Our continent has been living in peace for 140 years. Any attempt to interfere in the legitimate constitutional process in Venezuela, including by forcing a presidential election, is extremely dangerous, as it might lead to a civil war.
The lower house of the Brazilian Congress is moving closer to a vote on the most recent corruption charges against President Michel Temer. The parliamentary rapporteur on the charges, Bonifacio de Andrade, is due to present his report to the Justice Committee of the House, which will then vote on them. If the full House votes to proceed with the charges, they will then return to the Supreme Court to begin the trial. Our correspondent in Brasilia, Adriana Robrenio, has the details.
Here in the Constitutional and Justice Committee of the Brazilian Lower House, we are expecting the rapporteur on the accusations against President Michel Temer, Bonifacio de Andrade of the PSDB party, to present his report either in favor or against those charges of obstructing justice and criminal association, which Brazil's Attorney General presented against President Temer and two of his ministers, Eliseu Padilla and Moreira Franco. So that is what we're expecting today, the presentation of that report. The defense lawyers for each of the accused will then have the chance to speak for the same length of time as the reporters spoke. The members of Congress are now waiting, and the opposition is asking for the accusations to be presented separately. They say that an accusation against the president is not the same thing as those against his ministers. There's also a lot of argument over and criticism of the reporter himself, because he is a member of the PSDB, which gave up its seat on this Justice Committee, and so the Social Christian Party had to give one of his seats to the rapporteur. That has generated controversy, because some people are saying the rapporteur is in favor of the charges, but we will have to wait for his report, which, as we said, should be presented today. There will then be a vote on the charges, but that won't happen today. In any case, whatever happens in this committee, the charges against President Temer will have to go before the full House, where the members will take the definite decision. Now back to you in the studio.
Thank you, Adriana, for that report. Cuba has been celebrating the 149th anniversary of the beginning of the Wars of Independence. President Raul Castro presided over the main event in Santiago de Cuba. He carried an urn with the remains of Manuel Céspedes, regarded as the father of the Cuban nation. They were reburied alongside the graves of the leader of the revolution, Fidel Castro, and José Martí, Cuba's best-known independence leader. We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Representatives from the two Palestinian political parties, Hamas and Fatah, are meeting in Egypt's capital, Cairo, for reconciliation talks. The talks come after a week after the Palestinian Authority Prime Minister, Rami Hamdallah, visited the Gaza Strip to officially begin the process of forming a unity government. The meetings, which took place in Egypt, are aimed at implementing the 2011 Cairo Agreement, which looks to end a 10-year political split between the two parties. And in Palestine, physical and art education graduates protested the high rates of unemployment outside the United Nations Relief and Works Agency in Gaza. Our correspondent, Noor Hazrazin, has the story.
Dozens of unemployed graduates in physical and art education on Monday gathered outside the United Nations Refugees and Works Agency UNRWA office in Gaza to protest against lack of work opportunities. The organizers of the campaign launched a hashtag entitled "Graduate and I Have the Right to Work" to support thousands of graduates who share their suffering. The protesters, who expressed deep concern about potential loss of rights, called for equality with graduates of other specialties.
We came here to call for our rights as graduates in physical and art education, a specialty that has been marginalized from 2000 to 2017. We don't have permanent or temporary jobs. We call to be treated equally with graduates in other specialties. We have the right to get temporary governmental and UNRW jobs.
A decade of Israeli blockade and 3 wars have left about 43% of people in Gaza out of work, according to reports published by Gisha, a non-profit Israeli organization. Unemployment in the Gaza Strip rose by about 0.5% during the first quarter of 2017, making the territory one of the areas with the highest unemployment rates in the world. Noor Hazrazin, Telesu TV, Gaza.
And now let's take a look at some of the stories making the news around the world.
Protesters across the country took to the streets in a nationwide strike to condemn President Emmanuel Macron's public sector reforms. Schools, hospitals and transport services, which include airport traffic networks, are among the sectors affected. All major unions, representing around 5 million workers, united for the strike for the first time in decades. An estimated 30% of flights in and out of Paris and other major cities have been cancelled as a result of the nationwide protests. Kenya's main opposition leader, Raila Odinga, has dropped out of the presidential election rerun scheduled for October 26. Odinga announced his withdrawal on grounds that the electoral board behind the annulled vote in August had not been given sufficient reforms. The original vote on August 8th, which saw incumbent President Uhuru Kenyatta claim victory, was annulled by the Supreme Court due to apparent irregularities. Liberian President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf cast her vote in Monrovia as she prepares to step down after 12 years in power. Liberians head to the polls to decide a new leader who will replace Sirleaf, who was the first ever female president on the continent. Sirleaf came to power in 2005 and successfully maintained peace and led the country after its devastating set of civil wars, which claimed the lives of an estimated 250,000 people.
People must vote for those who they think will make Liberia a better place. Don't vote because of somebody influenced you to vote. Don't vote because of tribalism or religion or all of that. Vote who you think have the capability, have the means to be able to build upon my legacy So Liberia will be even better after the next 6 years.
At least 11 people have been killed as wildfires continue to sweep across areas of Northern California. Around 1,500 homes and businesses have been destroyed, according to authorities, forcing thousands of people to be displaced. The fires, which are still not under control, are located in California's wine-producing regions of Napa, Sonoma and Mendocino. US authorities have reportedly deployed its largest 747 firefighting aircraft in order to tackle the fires, which are said to be spread across 70,000 acres of territory. Syrian football fans whose dreams of reaching their first ever World Cup were left shattered as they watched their team from Damascus lose to Australia in the second leg qualifier in Sydney. Televised on the big screen from the capital, security concerns have meant that Syria's home and away fixtures be played overseas. Syrians reflected on a game which had a nation's hopes resting on it.
It was a good game, but we need more training. Our team is not fully equipped. We need them to be more equipped in the future.
We've come to the end of this evening's news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at telusyourtv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. To Tell Us Your English, I'm Soini Gray. Thank you so much for watching.